And now, recorded in front of absolutely nobody in their subterranean recording studio deep in the bowels of the Cigar Club of Indiana, it's time for the Five Stones Podcast.
All right, welcome to the Five Stones Podcast, and welcome today to this beautiful sunny day. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Raymond Modulin, a.k.a. the Real Estate Monkey, is what it says right down there. And with me are my fellow hosts. Colin, how are you today?
Good morning. I am Colin Hedegaard, known as the Great Dane.
And I am Joe Trester, the Real Estate Advocate.
All right, so before we get started, I would like to say I am back to the new world because Joe has been on me about being a monogamist with my cigars. So I actually tried something different and I hated it. And I blame you for that, Joe. You talked me into trying something new. So
look, it intensifies your love for what you like then. And that's okay.
Can you see that?
I am trying something new. This is a CAO flathead, which isn't bad. I don't regret trying something new, but it is not as good as the regular cigars I smoke, which are currently unavailable in the market.
This is a knockoff Cuban Diplomat that I got when I placed my order for my regular cigars. It's actually pretty good. I've been shocked. I may have to get a few more.
That's good. I'm glad you like it. I, on the other hand, did not. Which is funny because it was in the same family of cigars. It was still an AJ Fernandez, but it was completely different. It was acceptable. It would not be a go-to for me at all. So that's just a little catching up for you. So here we are on our post-eclipse show, and I guess we're still here, right? There was all kinds of rumors going around about the apocalypse, and somebody said, it's an eclipse, not an apocalypse. Calm down. I saw
exactly
a church sign.
Indianapolis is still standing.
Yes, India is still standing. The little town that I live in was all prepared for this big rigmarole and, had roads blocked and parking lots blocked and all that. And I think we got about 300 people. They were saying 3,000 people visit our city, and they sold like less than 100 tickets to their fest that they had.
The event, in my opinion, lived up to the hype. That was quite a spectacular.
Yes.
Sight. But the mayhem was not what they anticipated.
That was buddy of mine lives way out in Montana. I went to high school with, and he texted me and he said, "How was it?" I told him, I said, "It was probably the coolest thing I've seen in my 60 years. Birds quit chirping, there for 3 minutes when it went from 99 to 100%. The birds quit chirping. I mean, it was just eerie to think it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon and pitch black.
It got dark.
Yeah.
And I think the temperature went down 6 or 8 degrees.
Yeah, we lost like 8 degrees in Nashville, Indiana, because Kelly did it. Now, I will say I did something I haven't told either one of you two. You guys know that I'm not a drinker. I actually did a shot of Jack Daniel's Platinum, Johnny Walker Platinum during the 100% totality, so that I could always say, well, my last drink, I remember exactly when it was because it was during the solar eclipse. I had one little shot. I felt kind of lightheaded because I really don't drink much anymore. But today I want to pick up on a topic that Colin threw out, a couple podcasts ago, and I think that we needed to be a little more prepared. But let's talk about housing affordability.
Yeah, we spent the morning preparing and talking about this, but we've discussed it on the radio and on the podcast for the last couple of years.
Yeah,
as a coming problem, and I think we have hit the problem now. And I'm just judging by Five Stones Mortgage right now in the marketplace, we have got dozens of people pre-approved for homes that are not pulling the trigger for one reason or another. But I think primarily they're just feeling concerned about the affordability of really, I would say, a modest house. Indiana has a modest cost of living compared to the national, and I think even though our incomes are a little bit less as a state, affordability is a problem here, even with an affordable market.
Yeah. Well,
I just want to say that as we get into this conversation, I want to remind everybody that everyone's situation is different, and that's okay. So some of these scenarios, some of these things may apply to you, and some of them may not. We're going to probably be talking more, in a general type situation as opposed to every single individual.
that's actually a really good point. When we teach this class, one of the questions that I told Colin earlier, one of the questions I ask is, would you rather have 100,000, or I make it simple. Would you rather have $100 right now or $10 a month for the next 12 months? And you would be surprised that almost split in every class is people wanting the $100 today versus people that want the $10 a month. And obviously, if you do the math, you can see you're going to make more money. That would be reflected in what we call the interest rate. And then I follow up by saying, well, both answers are right or both are wrong, depending on how you want to look at it. So Joe's absolutely correct. Some of the questions that we're going to discuss today, we're going to try and hit both sides, but understand your particular situation may lean you towards one way where somebody else's may lean the other. And it's funny, we asked the same question to the three of us, and Joe and Colin agreed on one answer, and I was the other answer. So obviously, Joe's slightly right when he says that there's a right answer, because obviously the right answer is the one that I had.
Oh, yeah.
It is right for you.
It is absolutely right for me. And that's the key that Joe was pointing out.
And you've got to know yourself, and you have to know the situation you're in.
Yeah.
And you have to base things on where you are, not other outside pressures.
So let's start it like this. From the real estate side, which is where I come from, my board, which is our local board in the middle of Indiana, says that the median house price in April or in March was $280,000. Now, quick note, that's $100,000 below the United States median of 383.5. So Colin pointed out, we are literally affordable compared to most other states. But even at 280,000 as the median house, Colin, take over.
Well, yeah. So we were discussing the national average for most of our dialogue and a lot of our calculations. However, the data that we looked at suggests that the average person puts 20% down on a house.
Well, before we get to that, what was what I wanted you to go to was the median income for Indiana.
Yeah, median income is around 89,000 in central Indiana.
So at today's interest rate, and this is April of 2024, today's interest rate, that income is going to buy what house, Colin?
Well, we around those national averages is around 225,000.
All right.
Slightly above.
What you just heard Colin say from the financial side is that the average or median person in Indiana can afford 225. And you heard me say from the real estate standpoint, the median house price is 280.
Yeah. The median, the average family can't afford the average house, which is what we've been predicting. And mind you,
Colin has been predicting this since 2022 or before, that we were going to get to a point where the average person can afford the average house. And we have the data currently for Indiana that literally proves that he's correct. And he's not even close. And what I mean by that is his incomes that he said is 225, what they can afford, it's 280. That's not even a negotiation price. I mean, if it was $4 or $5 grand off, you could say, well, we might be able to talk that 280 down to 275. But there's no way in hell you're going to talk somebody listed at 280 down to 225. That's a hell of a reduction.
Now I'm using a factor at 25% of the gross income. Now that is, I would say, reasonable, and you can qualify for more than that. So they might qualify for 280, but again, we're talking about we're going to get to the down payment situation. We'll talk about that, but the average family they're not free of debt. They typically have a car payment, which we looked up. The national average car payment is probably set. What was it, 700 and something?
I think it was $726.
And the typical family has they're going to have utility bills. They're going to have a credit card. They're going to have a student loan a little bit. So talking about taking a fourth of your gross income for the house payment, well, the total house payment is going to be more like 35 or plus % of your income. And then you've got another 20% tied up in car and credit card. There isn't money left.
Yeah. And, we can also add into that, they've got a credit card because even the feds will tell you that the credit is now exceeded 1 trillion. So there are people putting stuff on their credit card. So everybody's got a credit card debt. So like you said, that's running that. And how long has it been, Colin, since you actually had a person with a 25% front end number?
It happens occasionally, but it is not that frequent. The more common situation, people buying houses right now are typically, I have to move, I have to have more bedrooms for kids, or first-time home buyers, getting married, trying to buy a house.
Yeah.
So those people are entering the marketplace with really the first-time home buyer typically doesn't have a lot of savings. That's why there are programs for low down payments and FHA and things that you can have a lower point of entry to get into a house, which means you're going to borrow more money and have a higher payment.
Well, and let's just do quick math. And we talked about this 2 or 3 shows ago. Right now, we're saying essentially that the average mortgage payment will be about $1,600 a month, roughly.
Well, the $225,000 house is more like $1,800 or $1,900.
Yeah. And the average median house price is in the $2,400.
So,
yeah, I think they use the data with a 20% down to make the data look better, because 20% down is by far not the most common. Probably 1 in 5 people.
So before we go any further, let's stop for a second, because I used the technical term and I want to make sure that our listeners understand. I called it the front end number. The front end number is the percentage of your gross income that is used for housing. This is what we're talking about, where the national average was 25, but Colin, it says he's seeing up around 30, 35, maybe even higher. So think about that. 33% would be a third of your gross income, not your take home, your gross going towards your house. So when you adjust that gross down to net, that's going to be shoot up to more like 40% of your income.
And the point that I was going to make is we were doing the math a couple of weeks ago about, a car payment and then childcare expenses. Okay. They're equal to that. So, I mean, if you're spending $2,000 a month on a mortgage, if you have 1 car payment, you have 1 child in daycare or preschool, you're spending the same amount a month on that too. So if you're already saying that we're looking at closer to 40% after, taxes, everything else, and then you're spending another 40% on that, you have 20% of your money left to live on. Groceries, gas, insurance, all of these things, it something's got to give.
Which are all going up tremendously right now with inflation.
Yeah. I saw a meme the other day. It said the most expensive vehicle to drive, and it showed a grocery cart.
The other aspect of the problem we're in right now.
Hilarious.
That is good. Sorry, I didn't give that credit for a moment. The other aspect of this that is a pain point is that if rates were to come down, and that would generate more activity, which obviously that's what everybody thinks. If they drop rates, things are going to boom. Well, a 1% drop in rates would be 4 cuts at 0.25%. I've heard professionals suggesting that might boost the cost of housing up 10%. In other words, the demand will drive prices up 10%. So that average house goes up another 30 plus $1,000 to 28,000, 30,000, right? The interest of 1% is not a big amount of that. You're going to break even 7 or 10 years down the road. We did that math too, but if rates go down necessarily, that could make things even harder to afford.
Yeah, believe it or not.
Qualify for.
So let's get into the question that we had the big debate about.
Yeah.
Is the interest rate really the driving factor that people should be looking at? Because everybody, I think, has been trained to go, well, interest rates are 7%, I ain't buying, without really looking at the numbers and the other effects that could affect the price of the house. So, like Colin was saying, all of that math we just looked at was predicated on the fact that it was 20% down and not 3.5% down, which is what an FHA loan is.
Well, 1% on $280,000 is $2,800, right? A year in interest. So that's about $225 a month. So if I tell you your payment's going to be $2,500 or $2,275, both of those are a shock value to a person that was used to 3% for the last 15 years. So it isn't like rates going down 1%, which is a dramatic drop, and that might take a year to go 4 rate cuts. That is going to knock $225 off the payment. That is still not in the realm of affordability.
So let's get to the math question that I want to pose to you guys that we kind of looked at in advance to get prepared for this. Was the difference on the median house, the 383.5, according to the U.S. statistics, the difference, same interest rate, same purchase price, but 3.5% down versus 20% down. The payment was $3,900 with 3.5% down. The payment was $3,000 with 20% down. So the question that I want to pose to you guys, would you rather spend 20%, which is 76 grand, and pay an extra $900 a month on your house payment? Or, no, I said that backwards. Spend it or save $900 a month, or take the 3.5%, keep your money in the bank, and pay $900 more a month in house payment.
So $70,000 in the bank, or $900 a month in a lower payment with not the $70,000 in the bank.
Virtually $80,000.
Well, my answer to that was I'd rather have the money in the bank, but I am a risk taker, and I would look to invest and do things with that.
So just to clarify, Colin's saying he'd rather keep his $76,000 in the bank and pay an extra $900 a month. Joe?
I would want to keep the money, but for a different reason. I mean, we aren't a society that stays in a house for 30 years anymore. So it would make more, if I'm staying there that whole time, it makes sense to pay the money and pay less. But if I know I'm going to go somewhere in 3, 4, 5 years, I would rather have the money in the bank to take care of things to make that happen than tied up in the house.
That's a good point. So let's bring that math in. Colin did this math for us. The break-even point was 70 months, 6 years.
Yep.
72 months would be 6 years. So 6 years is the break-even in this number. Now, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to go the other way. I'd rather spend the $76,000 and reduce my house payment $900 a month to keep that 900 as monthly cash flow for me. That is my answer, which is the other one than what you guys have said, which let's restate, like Joe said, there is no correct answer here, but that's the math you got to be looking at, because in the reality, what we just told you was the interest rate was not the key factor in this $900. It was simply the difference between getting an FHA loan at 3.5% down, or did you save money to buy a conventional loan where you put 20% down and you save $900?
Go ahead, Joe.
Another point I wanted to make. Once again, I want to let the rest of the general public know, because we get comments about statements like this. I think we're all fully aware that a large population is probably not sitting on this $76,000 that we're talking about right now.
That's true.
About the, my scenario that I would add to this is probably someone going for their second house, selling one, pulling their equity out, and do I take all of this equity that I just made on selling this house and put it down to buy the next one, or do I keep it in the bank? Because that's probably the biggest scenario where you're going to have $75,000 to $80,000 sitting there.
So that's the question. I guess I was saying my pitch to a lot of first home buyers would be, don't buy right now until you get 20% down.
Yeah.
That's the key that I think, because it suits my answer, is what people should do.
Is that distracting?
Sounds like you need a new lighter.
That one's out of gas.
So yes, Joe, you're right. You're entirely right. That's why you see this 900. And this is why people are saying stuff's unaffordable, because I don't have the down payment. I have to get an FHA loan because I only got 3.5%. Therefore, my house payment is now $3,900 on 383, as opposed to I'll save up the 76,000, get a 20% down payment, and only pay $3,000 a month, which, by the way, still sounds a little unaffordable to me too anyway, based on what I've got. But that's the question. Do you save the money to reduce your monthly house payment, or do you keep the money in your bank and increase your house payment?
So I got a couple points on the matter. The first is the alternative to buying a house. Let's call it that it's renting a house. So the house payment is going to be $1,900, and let's say the average rent is $1,600. We looked up, right?
Yeah.
So really, you're only going to be able to save $300, plus or minus. So how long are we talking about to get up to 70,000?
27.
A long time.
Yeah, 270 months.
The other point of this is, and I'm going again from our collection of this snapshot of moment in time, we've got a couple dozen pre-approved clients out there looking. I would say probably 4 or 5 of them are in a position where they have $70,000 or $80,000. Some of them have it. I'm going to say they have it, but it's in retirement accounts and other things, right? So they have it, but it's not really liquid or accessible. So most buyers right now in our particular little small sample size are first-time home buyers, or their families getting started younger. They do not have this option. So they're looking at things differently. They're struggling to come up with the 3 or 4% to do a down payment, and they're getting gifts, and they're looking for other alternatives, which we are trying to provide, by the way. But so it's a novel thing to say, would you do it with 80 grand or 100 grand? That some of them have that. They're selling one house and they're putting 100 grand in the bank. Now they got a real decision. Do I want to have a savings account of 30 grand and have a low payment, or do I want a savings account of 100 grand and have a higher payment?
Which I think is Joe's entire point, and you had mentioned it earlier. There's a difference of taking $76,000 out of your bank to get an 80% loan if you've got 300 in the bank. Yeah. But if you've only got 80 in the bank and you got to take 76 out, that's a different answer. And I think even Joe changed his answer when we changed the scenario.
Well, and I will also tell you this, my perspective is a little different because, the world doesn't know, but, we've had some health scares within the family the last year. And if we had not had cash in the savings account, I mean, it went from health scare to now spouse doesn't have a job because of the health concerns. If we hadn't had that money sitting in the bank, we wouldn't have been able to make it through. And sure, our mortgage payment's a little higher because we didn't put, 20% down to do it. But, if we had put that 20% down, the $900 a month, we wouldn't have been able to afford that payment either. So it having that money helped span that gap. So it really does come down to where you're at and what you're saying, Raymond. If you've got $300,000 in the bank, that's great. You can probably afford to put 75,000 down and not have a problem. But if you've got $75,000 in the bank and it's, well, do I clear everything out and put it down, or do I sit on it? You're probably in a scenario where you're better off sitting on it, depending on where you're at. I mean, we refied the house last year, and our mortgage payment jumped considerably because the rates went up. But we were able to pay off HELOC, pay off a car, and do some other things. And it's the same amount of money going out. It's just now going to one thing. So I condensed everything.
Who'd you refi with?
I believe I used Five Stones Mortgage, and that dashing gentleman in the center there.
Thank you. We're at the 26-minute point here, so I wanted to just make a couple quick points of things that the lenders are doing and we're specifically doing to help ease the affordability. One thing is the lenders are coming up with solutions. We actually have a situation we can give 1% as a down payment, and the lender is granting the 2% difference to make a 3% total down payment. So there's low down payment, and down payment assistance is number one. So the family that is struggling to come up with the entry, I call it an entry fee, but the cost of entry, we can help with that. The second thing we're doing is something called a temporary buy down. And what this does is it temporarily provides relief on the payment. So they basically, for a charge up front, they're giving an interest deduction in years 1 or years 1 and 2, as an example, 2% off in the first year and 1% off in the second year. So what you're talking about is on the way they apply that is straight off of the monthly payment. So if you get this temporary buy down, and even the seller can pay this in concessions for you, that knocks the payment down 2%. So on the houses we're talking about, that's $500 or $600 a month in year 1. So now you're going from that $2,600 down to $2,000, and then in year 2, it's a 1% deduction. So now you're at $2,300, and by the third year, your payment relegates to the normal payment of $2,600. But at that time, 2 years down the road, perhaps your situation has changed. Perhaps rates are better. So one other point on the big down payment is that if you put the money down, that is kind of a permanent decision. You can still tap into your equity and borrow the money and do other things, but keeping the money in the bank is temporary. You can 2 years down the road make a principal reduction if you decide we're still able to save or whatever. You can refinance and put a big lump sum in there and reduce that balance that you owe if that cash is still sitting there and you're not happy with how that turned out. But putting the money down is not liquid anymore. It's still accessible, but not liquid.
So let me contradict that with my side of the table. If I'm saving $900 a month, I can also put that in the bank to build back up to that 80 grand, and it would take 70 months. So for those people on the other side of the table, like Colin's saying, you could also take the cash flow, put it back in the bank, and eventually get back to that 76 grand that you were talking about, and it would take 70 months. So once again, it's that 6-year break-even point.
There really isn't a wrong answer. It's that is why we get to know our client, right? In real estate. I mean, because everybody has a different situation. So that's why it's important that you get the story and you get what you're trying to accomplish.
Well, I
and
think
then we make recommendations.
the other point to that is don't just look at the interest rate. I think that's what people have been trained to do, and they hear the interest rate went up, and that really doesn't matter as much if you have the ability with money in the bank by putting more down, or even using what Colin's saying at 5 Stones, this buy down. You're effectively knocking that 7% interest rate down to 5 the first year, and then 6 the second year.
The tools help, but I mean the real answer to this is that inflation is killing things for average families. Because when you think about an average car payment, my first car, I think it was $300, and I was in shock. How am I going to come up with this month after month? And now the average payment's $725. The average car, I mean, we were trying to think, what cars can we even get for $40,000?
Yeah.
Maybe a 10-year-old car, or but the point is, inflation is making everything else a pain point too, and it's also driving the cost of a home up. Houses on Miami Beach. I saw a guy talking. He bought his house for $350,000 45 years ago on Miami Beach. It appraised for $40 million, and that's the same house.
I'd be living in Kansas. I'd sell my house and move to Kansas.
He's on Miami Beach, but good grief. So the value of that dollar, it's the same house. Maybe he's renting, it's got a modern kitchen or whatever, but it's still 99 point whatever percent inflated. But the inflation is paying across the board. Your utility bills are higher, your car payment's higher, gas is higher, groceries is higher, and the house that you're buying costs more. So that is the real killer. Interest rates are going to go up and down. We're around average now for the last 40 years. It is not bad. It feels bad because it was at 3% for so long.
No,
that was the real travesty, was that they had to keep them low so long.
They're not going to do a whole lot with interest rates, because it's my understanding that April 10th, 2024, they're going to be coming out with their guidance this morning that inflation went back up again.
Yeah.
So
they are going to raise the rate. They said they were not, but they
very well may have to.
They very well will.
And I will tell you this, if they lower rates soon, it will not be because they're trying to stimulate. They will be because we have a catastrophe happening, and they will be having to lower out of desperation, which is going to cause more problems.
Or because we have an election coming.
Well,
and somebody wants to look good.
Well, I think the real way to fix most of it would be to stop printing money and paying for things that we don't have money for. I mean, it's the same thing we would tell our clients if they're buying a house. Don't spend money on that. You can't afford to do that if you want to buy this. We can't afford to continue to print money and hand it out.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've drifted into another topic that we can get into at another later date. We're talking about the housing affordability. I will say you guys would be shocked. Well, I'm not even going to get into that. Any last comments from you two?
I think you ought to have a conversation with us if you're thinking about it, and we can talk about options. I don't think you should be paralyzed by interest rates being high. I think you should be paralyzed by your situation and your budget. And maybe you don't need to be paralyzed, but we should have that dialogue and meet with a realtor and meet with a mortgage person and figure out, what does this picture look like? Don't sit in fear at home and just worry, because if you need a new house, or you need to move or buy a house, let's check it out. Once you look behind the curtain, you might realize it isn't as bad as you thought.
All right, Joe, I'm going to cut you off because I want to emphasize what Colin's saying.
Yeah.
Further signifies, don't just listen to the talking heads about the interest rates going up. Sit with Colin or one of his team members that have been trained in these financial tools for you to look at your case individually. Your brother who can't afford a house doesn't mean you can't. It's an individual. And Colin and his team have been trained in that. So at least reach out to Colin. And it may be that you're in no worse position than you thought, or it could be you're better than you thought. All right. So do not overlook the ability to call Colin and go, I want to talk to you. And maybe you guys part ways and go, yeah, we can't really help you or whatever. But don't just go, oh, I'm out because the interest rate's 7%. Not the answer. Joe, go ahead.
Well, the other thing I was going to say is, regardless of what is going on now as far as real estate brokers and how you're going to use them or if you're going to use them, and we've talked about that in the past, these are the scenarios that make it important for you to build a relationship with a real estate professional. In a lot of regards, I think it's going to be even more important if you are a buyer right now to get with someone that is going to help protect you and work through different scenarios for you. And there's stuff that we teach at Real University all the time in the finance thing. It's very simple. Sometimes we have to work with our clients and explain to them that right now isn't the time, and help them get with a Colin and work with them to, maybe 3 months down the road, you're able to make something happen. But you've got to talk with people that are knowledgeable and are going to look out for you and help you in your situation. There is no one size fits all for any of this.
What they need is a real estate advocate.
They do.
If only we knew one, right?
If we only knew one.
Oh, it's going the wrong way. But yeah. The real estate advocate. Gentlemen, I want to thank you very much. And for you out there, notice there are 3 people on the screen. We are still looking for a 4th. If you would like to come on the show and talk with us, either on with us or the opposing view, we encourage both of them. Put a comment in the notes and tell them, and we'll have our producer, i.e. Joe, get with you and schedule this. And we can do it streaming, obviously, where you can be in the luxury of your own home, so you won't feel like we're attacking you if that were the case. Click the subscribe button. We really would help us out to get more information out to more people. The more people that watch, the more people get to watch. So help us help you by hitting the subscribe button and the bell so that you know when we put new stuff out. Gentlemen, I want to thank you and then invite you back again, and I'll talk to you guys later. Peace out.
Harumph.